Our world is lost in unnecessary fear and hurt. Our systems seem scientifically engineered to make you small, powerless, and always waiting for the next great leader who will fix the problems around us. Worse, we're witnessing neighbor versus neighbor while warfare breaks out around our family tables. But you have access to a spirit, a strength that enlarges and empowers you. Even better, you don't need to wait for the next big movement. You can heal the world. It's time for governance by grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka. Good evening, everyone, and for those of you who are streaming later, welcome to Gracearchy. I'm Bill Protzman, your moderator. In just a minute, I'm going to introduce Jim Babka, but before I do that, I'd like to thank our show sponsor, the Zero Aggression Project. You can find zeroaggressionproject.org online. You can find the good people who are involved in the project all over the world. I am so grateful to be able to be a part of that, and I should say on behalf of the Zero Aggression Project, the views you're going to hear tonight may or may not be those of the sponsors and board members of the project itself, and they help us anyway. Isn't that just the best, Jim?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So we're going to be bringing Chase Oliver on momentarily, but I want to lay some ground rules first. You can participate from YouTube and from the Zero Aggression Project page on Facebook. As you share your questions, we will be able to see them, and Bill can choose which ones to elevate into the show, which we're looking forward to being able to doing. We want to hear from you. I will take questions that are of a presidential nature and that are civil, because we are Gracearchy after all, and not every bit of this campaign, and that's because, we're in the conflict machine after all, not every bit of this campaign has been civil. So we're going to try to keep everything kind of on the up and up. I have more than enough questions. I'm a professional, so I can go the whole distance without anybody participating. But if you have a good question, if you're going to make the show better, then please, by all means, we definitely want to hear from you. Okay. So let's bring Chase Oliver in. He is the Libertarian nominee for President of the United States. Chase, good evening from Georgia, correct?
Yep, I'm here in my home studio here in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm going to do a next couple of days of get out the vote efforts here in my home state before we enter into the final 48 hours, and I make my way to Dallas, Texas for an election night party with the Libertarian Party of Texas. So, yeah, I'm glad to be home for the next couple of days. My cats are enjoying seeing me for a few days in a row, which is a rare thing these last few months. So I'm happy to be here and happy to speak to your audience today.
Why Dallas for the party, by the way? I'm going to be there later in the month. Why Dallas?
Well, I'll tell you exactly why. No, it's because the Libertarian Party of Texas was already going to be throwing an amazing election night party, and they invited the campaign. And that's one less thing the campaign had to worry about. We could focus on getting out to voters as opposed to taking time away from our staff to have to plan a party. And I actually started my presidential campaign. The first event I did outside of the state of Georgia to explore running for president was in the state of Texas. And so it's kind of a coming full circle.
I want to ask you questions tonight that you have hopefully haven't gotten too many times, or maybe even at all during the course of the campaign. I want this to be a little bit of a different experience for you, because I know there's a lot of traditional questions, but I am going to start off with a very traditional one. I would like to know what issues you're running on. Most candidates have an issue or two or three that are their primary focus, and I'd like you to share with the audience what those are and give your primary pitch, please.
Yeah, so of course, as a libertarian, it should be no surprise that I want to limit the size and scope of the federal government. But I think the issues that I'm running on the most are the issues that matter most to the American people, namely the economy and getting inflation under control. That's why I want to balance the federal budget, get spending under control. We can't tax our way out of that issue. And then the other two great issues I think of our time right now, domestically, we have the immigration crisis at our southern border. I want to create a 21st century Ellis Island that treats immigrants with decency and respect, but also recognizes that we want to know who is coming in and who is going out of the country. And then lastly, I think as an anti-war activist for over 20 years, I'm committed to the idea of changing our foreign policy to one that's rooted in diplomacy, market exchange, directly speaking with one another, as opposed to doing that through bombs and bullets and drones and kind of the militaristic foreign policy we've had since 2001. And so those are the issues that are really near and dear to my heart. And a lot of those issues are of great importance to the voters. Every day when I speak to voters, I hear somebody concerned about the economy, someone concerned about immigration, and considering what's going on in Gaza and Palestine, Ukraine, and other areas of the world. Of course, foreign policy is really important, especially younger voters who may be in the military or have friends in the military.
I think these are great issues, and obviously immigration is one that is being discussed during the course of the campaign. I mean, we're hearing a lot of debate about that, but the other things are not being brought up as much. There doesn't seem to be, for example, there seems to be much more focus on small issues, on issues of symbolism, on issues of, culture war, stuff that's really beneath the office of president, quite frankly, much more virtue signaling type of things. Here
Absolutely.
No, I was going to say you're coming out at this thing and you're actually talking about real issues out there.
Yeah, and they try to address some of the economic issues, but it's always from the edges. And many times I think the economic solutions that are being offered by my opponents would actually make things worse. So for instance, the protectionist tariffs that are being put forward by Donald Trump, who says the tariff is his favorite word. To me, it's a bad word because it's just a longer way to spell the word tax, because that's exactly what it is on the American public. And so for me, instead of trying to tackle the economic issues by taxing the American public for wanting to import goods from around the world, which, by the way, a lot of the things we buy come from elsewhere around the world, especially if you're a business owner who needs component parts to create finished products.
Yes.
So that would raise the cost of those finished products. And, but cutting spending,
in fact,
you're just not hearing about.
On that question, I think people have a very short memory because we got a chance to find out what happens when the supply chain starts to break down a little bit during this recent epidemic. We don't use the P word here. We found my refrigerator. I paid the credit card bill off before the refrigerator arrived, right? Because there was a supply chain issue. And we will have more of those kinds of issues if these kind of really random tariffs are going to be put in place, because he's not talking about kind of a coherent plan. He's talking about giving exemptions to some groups who come and sit down and have a meeting with them, and then using it in other places to kind of coerce companies into doing something that they didn't necessarily feel was in their best interests.
Yeah. And well, let me just say, I know about that supply chain pinch because I worked in it. I worked in logistics. I worked in maritime logistics. I know exactly how stressful it was. When normally there's maybe 3 or 4 ships off the coast of Long Beach waiting to unload. And during the height of, from the 2020 to 2022, there were points when you had 60 and 70 ships sitting off of the West Coast, just waiting to be unloaded because of a lack of manpower at the port, tie-ups and truck power and the railroads. And, we don't want to see a supply chain crunch. I don't know. I don't feel like stocking up toilet paper and having to go to war for it in the supermarket is something that people want to return to. But that's what you get when you have protectionist economic policies. You get those interruptions, and it's not something that I'm keen to revisit. In fact, that's why I support free trade. That's why I support tearing down trade barriers so we can more easily have goods both being imported and exported around the world.
So given that you have this career background, I'm interested in your take on one specific issue. There was a strike. It only lasted a couple of days with the port and dock workers on the East Coast of the country. The West Coast was not involved in this. They already settled their arrangement. But they basically reached a temporary deal only a couple of days into the strike, only focusing on one of the 2 major issues, which had to do obviously with compensation. They didn't address the other issue that's looming, which has to do with technology at the port. What's your take on what's going to happen? The next president's going to face this. You're President Oliver. I'm curious how you feel that it's going to be like, what's going to happen here, and what you would do if it were you sitting in the Oval Office.
Well, I think first off, it's important for us to heighten our port efficiency, and automation and new technology does provide the ability to do that. And that could cost us jobs unless we do something that a lot of other ports around the world also do. Have 24/7 ports, have 24-hour-a-day open ports, which not all of our ports, especially on the East Coast, are open all day and all night. If you did that, you'd have an extra shift for workers. You might have less workers on the day shift, but when you move those employees to the night shift, even with automation, you can retain roughly the same number of employees, but highly increase the efficiency of our ports. And that maybe is the solution that we need to be looking at. But I would urge longshoremen to understand that automation is going to eventually come to our ports. There's a reason why Western Europe and East Asia are far more efficient and can move far much more cargo. And so I think we need to not just look at our ports, we need to also look at what are we doing once that container comes off the port? How quickly can we get things onto a truck? Truck power is a major issue in this country. We don't have enough truckers. We need to look at what we can do to hire more into that industry. Maybe that's not a government solution. That's an industry solution. They're going to have to discover how to get more truckers in the road, as well as rail infrastructure. So those are two areas in addition to what's going on in our ports. But yeah, the longshoremen, hey guys, I get you want to be compensated better, and I understand that that's going to happen. But you also have to understand automation's coming, and one way we can stave off so many job losses is to start putting on a graveyard shift.
So I'm curious, what issues in this campaign have you found any that you didn't think were worth discussing at all? What would those be?
Oh, there's quite a few. Many of them are like local issues. You get asked all kinds of questions all the time about, well, what would you do as president? And like as a libertarian, my base answer is, well, president doesn't do that. And I, as a libertarian, wouldn't seek to bring that up to the level of the presidency. That's a local issue that you're going to have to deal with. Now, what I would do in my community in Atlanta or in my home state of Georgia, that might be a different question you're asking. But as president, at most, I could use the bully pulpit for a lot of those questions. Things like,
wait a minute, would you use the bully pulpit? Do you think that's an
I
appropriate
absolutely
role?
would. I think it's actually a tool that the president can use. And I think if there are issues of great importance that talk about reduction of government, increasing people's liberty, of course, the libertarian president would use the bully pulpit where appropriate. I think it's something presidents have done. Sometimes it's a good thing. Sometimes it's a bad thing for them to stick their nose in local issues. You can argue one way or the other, depending on the particular issue. But I think I would absolutely use the bully pulpit where appropriate. Because that is a tool that allows us to spread our philosophy more and more. If we happen to elect a libertarian for president, they'd better be spreading our philosophy about not just federal issues, but you also have to say at the same time, there's a lot of issues that people are really focused on that you can't change, like term limits. Everyone wants to talk about term limits. The problem is to do that, you'd have to amend the Constitution. And that would require members of Congress to give themselves term limits. And they're not going to do that. And so for me, my advice is if you want term limits, wait electing incumbents that have been there forever. You can do that as voters. You can enact your own term limits.
Yeah.
The Electoral College is another one. The only way you're going to get rid of the Electoral College, again, is to change the Constitution. And you know who's not going to allow that to pass? The smaller states, of which you need a vast majority of them to do that. You're not going to get the Rhode Islands and the Connecticut's and the Hawaii's and the smaller states because they know they have outsized power. And so the best you can do is fight for proportional representation in your states. Change it to where they split the electoral votes up based on congressional districts. That's a thing you can do. And so I would urge people who have these, hey, are you going to do these big congressional, these constitutional amendment things? No, but here's the way we can change it in our neighborhoods or in our state.
So I want to remind people that if they want to we will elevate some of the chat that's happening on YouTube or on Facebook into this thread. We have the ability to do it. We're live in both places now, and we know that we have people joining us. So thank you for being with us. Chase, I'm not going to let you off easy on this one. I want to know, what question did you find the hardest to answer this year while you were running? What was the question that just really stumped you?
I mean, there have been quite a few of them. I think it's when you get really into the weeds on some particulars. I think there are definitely some of the mechanics of the bureaucracy that I'm not an expert on. And you have to do that research. And so sometimes you get questions about the process, not necessarily about like the philosophy or about what you would do, but exactly what are the exact mechanisms. I have an amazing policy team that has obviously helped me with a lot of those questions. But that one can be really tough. And then I think there are questions where young people are really concerned about certain issues that I really don't think the government can solve, like climate change. Like young people want to see this big government solution, hey, this big Green Deal that's just going to save everything. And I remind them that I don't want the people who run Amtrak to be trying to create the solutions and the innovation we need to solve a climate crisis that you see. I think that's better left in the hands of individuals who are going to develop technologies that people want, like the cars that people want to drive ultimately in the future, the technology of how we power ourselves. I think when we get government out of the way, you allow things maybe like nuclear power to come online. But it's not going to be like this big government, easy, neat little package that solves things. And I think sometimes to younger voters, it can be really tough explaining to people that it's not just a simple thing like flipping on a light switch. That's about trillions of marketplace decisions and not 435 Congress people's decisions that'll really move the country forward. And that's kind of a hard concept to explain to some people.
EH has contacted us and let us know that they are going to be voting for you. They'd like to know what you would do about Israel.
Well, I think what we need to do right now is signal that we're not just going to be creating, that there's not going to be any red line for us, because right now Israel has not only gone to war in Gaza, killed tens of thousands of Gazans, destroyed billions of dollars of infrastructure, but now we've seen expanding this war into Lebanon, which has displaced 1 million Lebanese people. Most of those people are just innocent people who are now displaced because rockets are being fired. They've attacked Iran, which can further inflame tensions in the entire region. And so we need to signify to Israel, like, hey, we're not supporting this movement that you're making. And in fact, we need to move our military aid out of Israel. Like, that's ultimately what the direction I would like us to see. But I think we need to urge them towards a ceasefire, and release of hostages. And let's see what we can do to start rebuilding the infrastructure of Palestine and allowing for each of these people to come to the table with a government that actually wants to come for peace. And that's not Hamas, and that's not the Netanyahu government. And what I would like to see in Israel, and of course, this is something I can't change, I can't control because I'm not a citizen, I'm not a voter. But ultimately, I think once this war ends, once we see a ceasefire, I think the people of Israel need to start asking the questions about the Netanyahu government, namely, how did October 7th happen in the first place? The questions of corruption in his government that were already happening before October 7th, and maybe voters should be demanding new leadership in Israel that's more committed to peace than exacerbating war. Because that will make, ultimately, if they embrace peace and if they can work towards peace, that will make the life of the average Israeli a safer one than one that's constantly under threat of war. And we need to keep peace as the main objective in that region. And I would urge Israelis to find leadership that wants to do that.
Kamala Harris, I'm going to ask you about each of these candidates individually. I'd like you to compare yourself to Kamala Harris and tell me why you're better than Kamala Harris.
Well, I think one of the things that definitely separates me is when she has often been on the side of the police state and arresting people for non-criminal behavior. I've been an activist towards removing those things, ending the drug war, police accountability and transparency, ending mandatory minimums, more money for public defenders than for these giant prosecutors' office budgets that they see. And she, throughout her career as a prosecutor and a DA and the AG in California, has really left much to be desired in the area of criminal justice reform. But also, I'm somebody who clearly answers the question when it's asked to me. Oftentimes, she dodges questions to, well, I was raised middle class, and kind of goes off on these flowery things. I answer the question when it's directly asked to me, which is something that is a bit of a rarity, I guess, amongst most politicians. That was the thing that was written about me when I debated Senator Warnock, is Chase Oliver answered every question in the debate that was asked of him. That should not be the bar we have to clear. I also think, just honestly, her policies are just big government policies. They're going to be tax and spend policies that will grow the size of government, grow the scope of government, and really put government more involved in our lives, whether it's our business or our private lives. It's not something that I'm keen to see happen in the long run. I want the government to be out of my life. I want somebody who's going to remove these barriers to privacy that have been up since 2001. Kamala Harris isn't the person to do that, because she's business as usual and then some. She's business as usual, plus let's tax more and let's grow government more. And that's not something I can support.
If Harris ends up losing, if she does not win next week, I think there's one ad in particular that's going to kind of be considered the Willie Horton ad of this particular cycle. And that was the one where she's on camera applauding herself for making surgeries, trans surgeries, available to prisoners at taxpayer funding. What's your take on that?
Honestly, I don't know if that's going to be the Willie Horton ad that takes her out. Honestly, I think the ad that if she loses that's most damaging is when she was on The View and she was asked if there's anything she would have done differently than Joe Biden. She said, nothing comes to mind. And there's plenty of things she could have said that I think could have gotten her out of that question without basically glomming on to the record of Joe Biden, which many Americans still, he is underwater under the approval ratings, right? I think that would be the most, impactful ad of the race. As far as trans people getting surgery in prison, ultimately, that's a question of the prison, the doctor, and what they think is the best healthcare for the patient. Now, we have prisons for a reason, to separate people from society for violating the civil liberties and laws of our nation. I think far too many people are in prison that shouldn't be in there. I think the cost is too expensive. But I do think if we are separating people from society for the purposes of violating civil liberties and laws, we do have to treat them with respect and give them the health care that a doctor would prescribe to them. And so if a doctor says, hey, this is what we want to prescribe to them and what we think is going to be best for them, that's up to the doctor in the prison. That's really not up to me as the president of the United States to determine.
Okay, but hold on, time out. That there is something different here, and that is that taxpayers are paying the bill for the healthcare that's going to be provided there.
Yeah. And ultimately, I'm not one to overregulate that healthcare marketplace. Like, if the doctor has determined the medical staff of a prison. Remember, we're also paying for the medical staff. We're paying for the prison. That's all taxpayer funded. But we also have to say, do we want to overregulate and sit here and micromanage those decisions? I don't think so. Like, ultimately, and I don't.
So you would be okay. You would be okay with federal dollars being allocated to that, so long as a doctor said so.
Yeah, if a medical board and medical professionals sign off on that, just as they would for any other medical procedure that might be, in their eyes, needed for a prisoner.
You don't think this medical procedure is different?
I would like to see what a doctor says about it, and not me. Ultimately, that's just the way it is. Keep in mind, why would the president have to have an opinion on that? Ultimately, I think that's going to be between an individual, a doctor, and what they view as the best need for a patient. I don't think that cosmetic surgery is usually going to be required. And I also think if we're looking at where this hits in the federal prison budget, it's so minuscule that it shouldn't be of a major concern. Like, honestly, I would be rather looking at how are we spending money in terms of housing people, treating them with proper food and nutrition. Like, those are the areas where I want to see us using the most efficient use of taxpayer dollars that affects the vast majority of prisoners. Like, how many people does this really affect? Like if we really look at the total cost, how many people does that really affect?
All right, so let's switch to Trump now. Make your case against Trump.
Well, my argument for Trump is simply that he's had 4 years as president, and he grew the size of government every year. He grew the deficit every year, even before 2020 and the very unique situation that happened there. The deficit was going up. He was also expanding the use of drone bombing around the world. Expanding bombing into Syria. People say, well, he didn't start any new wars. Well, he certainly started in a lot of new drone targets, and he didn't end any wars. So foreign policy-wise, I was not very happy. And then just his domestic policy is just erratic. That's what he is. He's very erratic because he doesn't have any really guiding principles. You don't know what he's going to do. It really is about whatever advisor is in the room at any given time. And he's had some decent advisors, and he's had some pretty terrible advisors. And it really is about who is the biggest sycophant to him. That's my biggest problem, is that he has this huge vanity that allows anybody who says anything nice to him, oh, Kim Jong-un wrote me this glowing, loving letter, so he's such a fantastic person. Meanwhile, thousands of people in North Korea are dying on a regular basis of starvation each month. Like, this is not something to be lauded. And that's my problem, is that, like, he just doesn't have a guiding principle. And if he did, it would be a whole lot easier to understand where he's coming from, or like what his plans are. But he just has concepts of a plan because he doesn't want to do that work. He just relies on other people to do the work for him, to fill in those blanks. And he just wants to say, America's great and tariffs are the best word in the English language, which, like, again, tariff is just a longer way to say tax. And so that's my main issue, is like, if he was a real, wanting to be guided by some sort of liberty-based principles, which I don't trust. And I will say, if he is elected, I hope he does free Ross Ulbricht. I hope he does put a libertarian in the cabinet. He's made those promises. But he made a lot of promises when he got elected in 2016, too. And a lot of those things didn't happen. And so let's just say I'm not going to hold my breath.
I want to switch gears a little bit and get into an area that maybe is less familiar in terms of someone running for president. But our show happens to be titled Gracearchy. And so one of the things that we're interested in is kind of what motivates and makes people tick spiritually. Like how do they view their purpose and their meaning in life? And start off by telling us just a little bit about do you have a relationship with a higher power, and what's the shape of that?
Yeah, so I'm a Christian, and I was raised in kind of the evangelical faith as a child. Like my grandparents are old school Baptists. My parents were raised in the evangelical faith. Today, I'm an Episcopalian. I really have found faith in the idea that God is an all-loving God, and trying to live through those values, trying to be somebody who respects people who are especially different from me. Because we're all foreigners in the land of Egypt, right? And so for me, that has been like a compelling issue for me to like respect and honor other people, and kind of give them the common grace that I would want. That's a thing that I say all the time, is common grace is just respecting the fact that other people might be living differently than I do. But if we can do that in like peace with one another, and just like kind of respect the fact that, hey, you might have a different worldview than I do. And as long as I'm not punching you and you're not punching me, or stealing from me and stealing from you, whatever, that's common grace. That's just saying, and that's kind of where I was brought up in the faith, is like, my faith is something that's very personal to me. And it's something that gives me faith. It gives me community. It gives me comfort. And so I'm proud to be a Christian. I think I try to live through those values as much as possible. And I encourage other people, if you want to try to find your place, I think the Episcopal Church is a great place to do that. I'm also somebody who recognizes that there are people of all faiths in this country, and part of my faith is to respect that. And even though I find comfort in the Bible and comfort in the words and the teachings and the lessons of Jesus Christ, I also am comforted in knowing that I can do so in a place that allows me to be free and freely express myself.
Is this something that's helped you get through various challenging moments here in the last few months in this campaign? And if so, how?
Oh, absolutely. First off, it humbles you. Your faith humbles you. When you're running for president, right, you sometimes get a bit of an ego, right? Because you're the top of the ticket. You're the thing that everybody's, and throughout this campaign, you have to remind yourself that you're just a part of this. You're just a piece in God's design, whatever you're doing, running for president, just working your job, whatever it is you do in your life, you're just part of God's design. And so that brings you back to being where like you recognize you're small in comparison to all the greatness of the universe. And so you need to be that humble when you're doing this job. You can't have an ego about it. You can't. And then, of course, when times are tough, you find a lot of strength in the fact that many people throughout the Bible have had certainly greater trials than I've ever had. I've never had to face the lion's den. I've never had to face the pain of a crucifixion, or the flogging, or any of the other things that have happened to so many other people in the Bible. I've never had to face a real trial of faith, these kinds of things. And so for me, if these people, these great people, can kind of handle those pains, the pain that I'm going through is really relatively small by comparison. So even if you're going through, rough travel, you're on the plane, you have to stay in you wake up in the hotel and you can't remember what state you're in because you've been traveling all over the road. You're not eating your best because a lot of times you're landing late at night and you're just eating at a diner or a McDonald's, right? So your cholesterol is probably a little higher than it was at the beginning of this whole thing. Like, all of those stresses are really tame in comparison to the trials and tribulations that you read about in the Bible. And so again, it keeps you humble, but it also keeps you centered. And I think that gives me a lot of strength. So
I'm going to make a moment of personal commentary here. I think you have exhibited tremendous grace during this campaign. First off, I want to talk a little bit about the Libertarian Party, if we can, just for a couple of minutes. I'm curious what your predictions for the future of the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian movement are in the coming years.
Well, I'm committed to helping it grow and helping to professionalize it and helping to make sure it's focusing on helping libertarians. I don't want us to be seen as the JB team for the Democrats or for the Republicans. I want us to continue to celebrate our wholly different political philosophy and be able to push that and help it grow. And so I'm committed to helping candidates over the next few years to try to be a mentor, to try to get best practices, but also to try to find leadership in states and at our national level who are committed to the growth model of the Libertarian Party, to increasing our membership, increasing our donors, increasing our professionalization, that we can really best spread our philosophy to as many people as possible, and really hopefully become a true competitor to the two-party system in the long run. Like this is not a single project for me. This is not the single election cycle. This is a many year-long project I'm looking to be committed to.
Well, we've got a question from Doug Hood. He wanted to he's letting you know that he's voting for you too, but he wants to know your take on the SEC versus cryptocurrency industry.
Well, I want to keep the government out of the hands of crypto as much as possible. Certainly, I don't want them regulating Bitcoin or any other kind of crypto. And the biggest thing to avoid is the implementation of the CBDC. Like, I think that is something we need to continue to sound the alarm about, not just through November, but beyond. And we need to make sure that loud and clear, we are letting voters across the country know, not just libertarians, but Republicans and Democrats know that the CBDC would be the end of cash currency eventually. It would be the end of private exchange. And would ultimately allow for the government to be able to control us so much that the kind of social credit score stuff you're seeing in China would be pale in comparison. And so as cryptocurrency continues to grow and flourish as a marketplace, I want to continue to keep that as a little bit of the Wild West and not see it regulated by the SEC. Certainly keep Bitcoin free, but I just don't want to see that implementation of the CBDC. And I do warn, some people like hearing, oh, the government's going to buy and invest into Bitcoin. I worry that that's the back door into government regulating Bitcoin. If they say, hey, we're going to take some Bitcoin as our reserve currency for a little bit, it's only a matter of time before they start using the SEC to flex muscle and to say, hey, we're holding some of it as our reserve, so we got to keep an eye on how it happens and manipulate what happens there. And it's only a matter of time before government regulation comes beyond that. So I say, keep the government entirely separated.
I think that's the real strength of it, right? It's kind of the chance to be to set up kind of an alternative economy, and do so in a healthy, safe way.
And that's what we need to keep defending. Absolutely.
Bill, you had a question?
Yeah, back to our topic about what it's like to be like the Libertarian presidential candidate. It's more like, what is it like to be any candidate who's not in the duopoly, but like, I'm curious, Chase, what keeps you motivated? What keeps you going in this? What's under the hood that really keeps you in this game for so long?
Well, I think what you have to remember is that your goal is not only winning in November, the election, right? There's a lot of other victories you can have as a libertarian or an alternative party candidate, which is ballot access victories. You can hit the numbers you need, so that way it's easier for libertarians to run in the future. That takes a lot of the expense of having to gather signatures, a lot of that time off the table, so you can focus it and reallocate those resources to the candidates in their races, right? Same with party status. Party status in a lot of states gets you invited onto the debate stage when you're a candidate, or gets you access to things like the Iowa soapbox stage at their state fair, which has tons and tons of people coming through, right? And so you want to hit those numbers, right? And then also you want to put good ideas in the atmosphere. Hey, even if we don't win, let's say we put enough ideas in the atmosphere that one of the other parties adopts those ideas and says, in an effort to gain libertarian votes, we're going to kind of implement these things at the local level or at the state level. These are good things to push the ball forward. And so that's what really motivates me, is like, let's see what we can do to spread the message of liberty as much as possible and try to grow the tent. We want to get as many people into the tent, the libertarian tent, as possible. We want to get them out of the duopoly tent. And if we're doing that, overall, we can grow our message, grow our philosophy, and ultimately move the Overton window towards liberty and fight for a lot of good causes, both at the national and the local level. And that's what I'm committed to doing after this election. I'm going to get back to being an activist, too. I cannot wait to getting back to just getting out in the street with a bullhorn and a sign in my hand and organizing locally.
I love it. And stop fighting ourselves, right? Jim and I have had a couple episodes on this, but we don't need to be fighting each other on anything right now.
Yeah, I try to avoid internal stuff as much as possible in this election. Certainly not for lack of trying. There's been plenty of people who want me to get involved in internal disputes and debates. I've tried to avoid it as much as possible. Of course, when you're asked about it by the press, you have no choice. But I do everything I can to try to stay out of it and really recognize that we need to be a unified libertarian party, that this is not, again, the JV team for the Democrats or the Republicans. We need people who believe in the principles of liberty to come together around the Libertarian Party. I recognize we had a really contentious convention. It took us 9 hours and 7 rounds to get me as the nominee. And that's because we had a lot of great candidates who were running for the Libertarian who had multiple, different bases of support. I've tried to say that we need to unify around our common principles. I've tried to run. If you look at my website, you look at my platform, it is our common principles as much as possible. I try to keep, those areas of division out from being in the forefront. Why? Because I want libertarians to unite around those common principles. We'll see how successful I am on Tuesday to that. But even after Tuesday, I'm going to continue working to try to build the Libertarian Party and make it into a positive force for political change in this country.
I love those answers. I mean, I even in the way that you're addressing things tonight. So, when I asked you about the future of the movement, you exemplified grace. You talked about what you're going to do there. You just said you don't want to, bring these internal discussions in. You talked about having multiple great candidates when it was, it took all those hours to select the nominee. This has been a tough year. Chase, I was the press secretary for Harry Brown in 2000. So I have some familiarity with these things. I'm a former state chair. I haven't been a member of the party since 2003. And I have never seen anything like what you've had to go through as the nominee of the party. Not all of our nominees have been exemplary, honestly. One, went very hard towards the Republican Party and eventually rejoined it. Another arrived, great guy, but he did not expect to win. So he, took a long time to kind of get things kind of started up. 4 years ago, there was a worldwide epidemic that was shutting a lot of things down. It was even hard to schedule a nomination convention. And so they started behind an 8 ball there. There's been some real challenges for this party, but I've never seen some of the things like I've seen this year. And your consistent refusal to take the bait. But I can't help this. I just, just this week, as I understand it, the chair of the party said that most of your campaign has involved going to gay pride events and doing these small rallies, and that you help the left, that you're only pulling from the left, excuse me, and that you're helping Donald Trump. I'm curious, first, to respond to that. Are you really are you pulling more? Do you have any insight as to what's happening right now? Because traditionally, that's not how libertarian candidates have worked.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't have any internal polling. I don't know if the chair does that she would like to share with us. I don't know if she's funded a poll with many of the, some of the money she's gained throughout this election cycle. But for me, it's not something I've done. I don't have an internal poll saying who I pull from the most. If she has that information, I would love for her to share it with me. But overall, I've been trying to gain votes across the spectrum, left, right, and center. I've been trying to speak to people who want a different way of seeing government interact with people. And that is not just an issue that matters only to the people on the left or to people on the right. That's an issue that matters to people across the spectrum. As for doing pride events, here's the thing. I'm the first LGBTQ candidate for president across the country. If you don't think we should advertise that fact to a community of people that might want to become libertarians, I think you're missing out on trying to market to a population of people that do respect the ideas of free speech and free expression. Certainly, it's how I became a libertarian. It's because the Libertarian Party of Georgia was at the Atlanta Pride Festival in 2010. It's one of our most successful outreach every year. But also, I've done tons of events that aren't pride parades. I've done events at schools and colleges and even high schools speaking to students about the principles of liberty. I've done events where I've attended debates, 3 third-party debates, the Free and Equal Debate Series throughout the country with people like Jill Stein and Randall Terry of the Constitution Party and others.
I was there. I watched the debate. You did an excellent job that day. I've
done a lot of stuff that's different. I've done the Soho Forum debate where I debated Art Laffer on the principle of, is Donald Trump the best choice for president? I obviously argued in the negative. And so there's been plenty of events where I've been traveling the country trying to speak the message of liberty. And of course, I've done tons of media, mostly local media markets, to try to reach out to those voters. And so I think it's just a mischaracterization of my campaign. And again, without polling data, we don't know who I'm pulling from. We don't know where my votes are coming from. And, ideally, I would like to pull votes from both. And if one helps the other, if I beat the spread and help one of the candidates beat the other or whatever, I'm sure I'm going to get blamed or applauded for one or the other, depending on how it goes by whichever group of people. That's not really my concern. My concern is growing the number of libertarian votes and growing the awareness of the Libertarian Party and supporting libertarian candidates across the country who are spreading our message in races across the country that we can help support winning. That's what our party should be focused on. That's frankly what our chair should be focused on. And that's what I'm going to be focused on throughout this campaign and beyond, because my job does not stop on November the 5th.
Okay, so we got another question coming up here in a moment, but I just want to continue this thread for at least one more question. I want to understand. I've talked so people know me as the libertarian. Like, in my social circle, you probably have the same thing going on, right? There's so few of us that people, kind of come to me and ask what's going on this year, right? And I run into basically two types of people right now, and that is they're asking me. They've either heard of you and they've heard something what they consider to be very negative, or that your priorities are certain things, or they, for example, like, you've been accused of wanting to trans children, for example. And that came out like as soon as the nomination happened. And every interview that you've done, you've pretty much had to address these. I'm not going to ask you your position on these things. You can volunteer if you want, because it's been, my frustration is that every time you've been in an interview, you have addressed these questions. You've also explained, like you did at the top of this interview, what your priorities were. And that had a source. That came from a place. There were people that made sure that those issues were the things that you had to address rolling right out of the convention on shows like Jimmy Dore or Tim Pool. And then there are other people that say, well, why haven't they done more to elevate their profile? So I'm just kind of curious, like, what are the challenges that you guys have been facing? Are you going to address those? Are you comfortable addressing those now, or is that something you'll wait until after the campaign to talk about?
Yeah, well, what I can say is I think it's really funny when people say I focus on that particular issue when I have never made it like a lead in. It's never been something that I focused on as a candidate. Again, if you go look at my platform, where is it? Right? The only reason that gets asked of me, I think a lot of the times, frankly, is I'm an LGBTQ candidate. And people want to make this about the culture war because people who support, frankly, the Republicans know that the Republican Party has no economic record to speak of. They've grown the size and scope of government. They continue to raise the debt ceiling. They elect feckless leadership in the House that continues the spending. And so they know this has to be about a culture war. They know if in a debate over economics, they can never really beat a libertarian. And so that's where I think a little bit of this comes from, is its coordinated effort to try to delegitimize. But ultimately, I've been running the campaign I've been focusing on the issues that matter to the American people, and not to the online libertarian Twitter class. Like, if I did that, I would merely be.
Are you happy? Are you happy and satisfied with your campaign? Has it been have you done what you've hoped to do?
Oh, we've had lots of headwinds and challenges. I can admit that certainly I wish we could have fundraised more so we could have had a more robust get out the vote campaign and a lot of other things. And some of those factors, can be controlled by the campaign, but a lot of them are external factors. This is the first year we had a major independent candidate choke up a lot of the third party oxygen in the room and then drop out and endorse Trump, right? Excuse me. This is the first campaign where we've had such a divided Libertarian Party, where leadership itself has been kind of in the tank for one of the major parties, much to the detriment, I think, of the Libertarian Party.
Which is just something I could have never have imagined before. I couldn't have imagined that, and I couldn't have imagined the focus on the candidate's sexuality. Those are two things that, as a libertarian going all the way back to 1996, again, I understand that we're in the conflict machine, but the circular firing squad aspect of this is really kind of hard to swallow. It's always been hard for me to swallow. It's why I haven't been in the party since 2003.
And frankly, I thought I could overcome a lot of that division if I, showed myself to be a hard worker, which is why I campaigned across all 50 states. It's why I devoted myself to meeting as many libertarians where they were as possible to answer those questions before the convention, because I knew there was going to be those kinds of questions. And I tried to answer as many as I could. And then when I won fair and square, I feel like some people just felt like that wouldn't be good enough. And I ultimately do feel like some people really wanted the Libertarian Party candidate to do the Blake Masters approach, to drop out weeks before the election, to do what RFK did. And I think that would have been disastrous for our party. And so if anything, I'm glad I won for no other reason than I'm going to be running this race through Tuesday. And I'm not, fully committed to thinking that everybody would have done that, because I think some people could have been talked into doing the Blake Masters move. And that's just not my move. It's certainly not what somebody like Harry Brown would have done. And I'm committed to fighting for this party, for our principles, and not to fight for the Republican Party, the Democratic Party.
Well, I just want to say, if from my perspective, you have exemplified grace because you have consistently come back to the issues again and again. You know, people don't understand the most important thing that a libertarian candidate does when running for this office is not try to get votes. That's not the goal. The goal is to grow the party. The goal is to get more people exposed to the message of libertarianism and begin to get them aware that there's an alternative. And you've done that very ably. I've noticed, for example, Harry Brown was the master of sound bites. You've done a very good job of making sure that you take the limited time you have in a setting like this and maximize it. So I just want to applaud you for doing that and for avoiding taking up the bait.
Yeah, well, I see a question there at the bottom of the screen from Cassie about healthcare.
Yes. So please address. She's an undecided voter. Win her over, please.
Yeah. So what can we do to address healthcare costs and healthcare debt in this country? Well, first, we can do some reforms that will make healthcare less expensive for you. First, we can remove the cap on health savings accounts. Right now, it's capped at $4,000 for an individual, even though the average individual spends over 13 grand a year in healthcare costs. So let's remove that cap so you can completely get Uncle Sam out of your healthcare spending. So it's fully tax-free, because the government should not be taxing you for something like that anyway. So remove the cap on health savings accounts. That makes that happen. Let's allow you to buy health care across state lines, health insurance across state lines, which will immediately bring more market competition and to lower the cost of healthcare. Beyond that, let's allow you to buy prescription drugs across national boundaries. So that way you can see a lowering of the prescription drug cost, because if you can buy cheaper drugs in Mexico or Canada, you best believe they're going to start lowering the costs here in the United States to compensate for that. Let's remove patent evergreening, which allows for things like insulin to stay on the marketplace without a generic coming up to compete with it. Because if we could produce a generic to insulin and get it in the marketplace, it could be available to people for a fraction of the cost. And there's a lot of other drugs that are like that. Let's support removing regulations around things like direct primary care so we can bring more of that online as a competitor to the insurance marketplace. Direct primary care is where you just pay the doctor's office the rate as opposed to an insurance premium, and they operate outside of the insurance model. There's a lot of things we can do to reform and create more choice in the health insurance marketplace and the healthcare marketplace overall, and embrace market practices to bring down costs as opposed to gaming the system. And so when you see things like, hey, we're just going to make insulin $25 for everybody, that's not what's happening. They're making insulin for the end user $25, but everyone else across that health insurance pool or across Medicare is footing the bill, and that's you and me. And so I think we can do reforms that will lower the cost of drugs, lower the cost of healthcare access, increase the ability for you to save and spend on healthcare, and not have to go into debt. And all of those practices will lower the costs and, in fact, lower the amount of people going into debt over medical insurance and or over medical costs. And so I hope you can check out the full plan at votechaseoliver.com.
There you go.
We have all of those things listed right there, as well as the rest of the platform.
One more time, that website was?
Yeah, votechaseoliver.com. Kick the tires, check out the platform, compare it to Trump and Harris, and honestly, vote for who you think has the best ideas. And I would love to earn that vote.
So there you go, Cassie. I hope you're going to be signing up there. That's me personally speaking. I can't speak for the Zero Aggression Project. Chase, you've done a great job, and I really appreciate you being with us tonight. I want everybody to know how busy you are, because we have to end this interview now, or at least we have to let you go, because you're on to another one.
Yep. Well, I'm on to the next thing, but I do want to end. This is a podcast about grace, talking about faith, and I wanted to end with a little bit of scripture that can hopefully inspire people as they go forward into this. And remember, yes, what's that?
Please.
Oh, well, and one that will help people, when the times are tough. Just remember Isaiah 40:31. But for those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not be faint. And so as we go into whatever it is we're doing in our lives, let's do it with grace. Let's do it with love. And if we do that, God will keep the spirit in us. God will keep us going. And I think that's a great way to sign off and say, thank you so much for the opportunity. And on to the next thing, and on to Tuesday, and on to whatever comes beyond. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Chase's pleasure. Thank you very much for joining Gracearchy. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, Chase. Thanks.
So we had a couple of interesting moments there.
Well, he did, yeah.
Yes. I think some people are going to be a little bit interested in how he handled the prison trans question. I think if people watch this, that's something that's going to get circulated and discussed. But gosh, what he's had to deal with, it bothers me that he hasn't had the same opportunity that previous nominees have had from his and support from his own party. It really does bother me.
It feels like he'll be back. You know, Jim, this is the first time we're going to see Chase running for president.
Well, I don't know whether he will or not. There's other candidates out there. There's other people who've talked about, running. A lot can change in 4 years too. Mm-hmm. But I think that the libertarian brand should be about who is being coerced. So when I joined the party, the way I like to explain this is that it was possible for two members, one a pastor, the other a pornographer, to sit down next to each other. And as we like to talk about here on this show, have a lemonade, have a conversation, just, get to know each other, find out what the other's deal is and find the other person interesting and be able to not just tolerate, but get along with them. And that was kind of the spirit of the whole thing, was that, we have this liberty, we have this freedom, but we're going to go explore and learn for ourselves how that works and what makes us happy. And there's a freedom of conscience that goes along with that. And so I think there's been a bit of an opportunity lost here because we've seen libertarians, and this has been going on long before this year and long before the present management of the party, where there's been a drift into the culture war. And I haven't spoken out on this. I haven't written about this. I haven't entered online debates tonight. The stuff I'm saying to you right now, this is the first time I've said this stuff publicly. There's some friends that know what I've thought, but I've not said this stuff publicly. And I think that there's been bad behavior that has been focused on the wrong thing. It's been focused on culture war. And it's held back the ability to take advantage. So every year, every time that the Libertarian Party has run a presidential campaign, the party membership swelled that year. It usually goes down the year after. And the reasons should be evident and obvious as to why this happens. But because of the way things have been handled up to this point, that's not happened this year. That opportunity has been squandered and lost. The numbers have been down. Not up, down. Not flat, down. And the membership is the thing that matters, which is something that several of the managements of the recent, going all the way back to this entire century, basically, people haven't understood. And if they had been managing things in such a way that they were hoping to get as many libertarians as possible, the nominee is the nominee. That's been chosen by the delegates of the party. And this nominee was prepared to represent. I mean, man, was he prepared to represent. I've watched probably a dozen interviews so far. I've been very impressed with how he handles himself in terms of being able to take that limited amount of time and say just the right thing, because you don't have long. Like I'm expounding right now. I'm just speaking from the heart. You, in those situations, a lot of those interviews are 3 minutes and 5 minutes and 7 minutes. And you're going to get rapid fire questions, and you got to be able to handle and respond to everything that's coming at you. And you need to be able to do it artfully and hard hitting. You need to have your best stuff ready every single time you open your mouth. And that is basically what he's done. The campaign that he's run, if we're being completely honest, has been about things that we should all care about. War,
it
the
really
economy,
has, right?
Immigration.
Nobody's talking about those except Chase.
Well, the immigration thing's being talked about across the spectrum, but nobody's offering the alternative that he's offering. And there has been some foreign policy discussion in this race. Some, not enough, but some.
Thanks to Israel.
But again, nobody is offering the perspective he's offering. Agree, disagree, at least it's out there. And we should be having more adult dialogue that's based on that. Now, we're not surprised by any of this because it's how the conflict machine works. The conflict machine, politics is war by other means. And it is war. But it shouldn't be a war where you're getting friendly fire. It just shouldn't. And this is an opportunity lost because here's a guy out there and the things that he was honest, and I mean blatantly, it is dishonest to say that the things that he was talking about were some of these other issues that have been laid on him by other libertarians who did not want his nomination. It's unsettling because the stakes are so high. I'm going to close and tell you what I think is the biggest issue facing the country. In fact, I'm going to give you the 5 biggest issues facing the country.
Hang on. We've only got a live stream that lasts an hour, Jim.
5. The debt. The fact that next year Congress will spend more in that budget, thereby increasing the debt. And do you know what candidate's going to do anything about that? Well, there's only one candidate that has talked about that and actually explained a plan. And when candidates get asked what they're going to do to address that thing, they lack answers because you know what? They're not going to do it. The debt during the next term of president will go up by at least $7 trillion. I promise you that. You can write that down here today. This show will be up there on YouTube for a long time, hopefully, and you'll be able to go back and look. It'll go up that much, at least, regardless of which one gets chosen. And how much longer is this sustainable? How much more economic damage is it going to do to us and those who come after, our offspring, our children, our grandchildren? How much? And so I think that you have to do your very, very best with the circumstances that you're given. And Chase has tried to do that. And I thought he handled himself with grace here tonight. And I was interested. In fact, I even enjoyed the fact that before he departed, he shared a wonderful piece of scripture.
Good show, and gratitude to Chase. Gratitude to our voters who are all expressing their opinion in the chat. Thank you. It takes bravery to be that honest about who you're voting for right now. Nobody knows that like the party voters do, and we love you guys for that. And thank you for your questions and comments too, by the way.
We have an expectation when we do a live show, we don't do very many of them, that the audience will be smaller than the one that we will get after this goes out and is published. And so it'll be up within the hour, right, Bill?
Yes.
It'll be up in all the normal places that we have. You'll be able to get it and you'll be able to share it with friends. And hopefully we've done something unique in Chase's campaign tonight. And I appreciate everyone who's chosen to join us.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.